Okay, everyone. Well, welcome to this very exciting hour. We have Deepak Chopra on the Hangout with us on the Zoom, and I'm really excited to have Deepak here. I was fortunate enough to meet him about 2.5 years ago for a project we were working on at the Vatican with Pope Francis around this concept of tenderness, of people helping each other and tenderness to the environment. And it was a pretty amazing time we had at the Vatican, and when we stayed connected as friends now. And he's just a remarkable human being. Obviously, just a little background. He is a licensed physician and was at New England Memorial Hospital. Was one of the chief of staffs there, and also obviously got out of that or moved from science and traditional medicine into all the things he's doing now with alternative medicine. And since the 80s, he's been involved in leading that thinking around wellness and all the things now that are more in vogue than ever before. And obviously a lot of the work that he's done, I think he's written close to almost 100 books. I think he's on book number 99, trying to go to 100. He's been on Oprah Winfrey, as many of you have seen, and he's done an amazing amount of work. I think more importantly, as you know, I've done a couple of talks with him. We had one that was a podcast on AI. And so the idea of consciousness and AI and how does the brain replicate human thinking is one of the things that we spoke about. So I'm really excited to have him. With no further ado, I welcome Deepak
Thank you, Rob.
to our family here. We have over 300 people right now from around the globe who are at the company, who are coming in. So excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a privilege.
So the first thing I wanted to ask is, people are probably pretty curious, how did you get started down this journey of life from traditional medicine, from living in India, becoming a traditional doctor, and then where you are today, and what's been sort of your path to get there?
Well, the path actually started when I was 6 years of age, and one day my grandfather, with whom I was living at that moment, because my parents were in England, and one day my grandfather got a call, a telegram from England that my father had passed all his exams as was the member or fellow of the Royal College of Physicians. My grandfather was very excited. He was an old army sergeant from World War I, and he took me and my little brother to a movie and a carnival. The movie, I still remember, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. And then in the middle of the night, he died. He was so excited. I don't know what happened, but he died. And he was taken to cremation. And the next day, his ashes were brought in a bowl about this big. And one of my uncles said, "What's a human life?" Yesterday he was taking the kids to a carnival and a movie, and today he's a bunch of ashes. So I guess I started my existential anxiety at the age of 6. My little brother, who later went on to become the dean for education at Harvard Medical School, his skin started peeling, and we took him to every physician you could imagine, my grandmother and my uncles, and no one could make a diagnosis till one healer said, he's feeling vulnerable because he's missing his parents, and that's why he's shedding his skin. When his parents come back, he'll be fine. And so that's exactly what happened. As soon as my parents come back, my brother was fine. Anyway, that started my existential anxiety. I never took existence for granted. I never took existence for granted. Right now, the whole world is in panic because they took existence for granted. And so I went to medical school. I trained in internal medicine, endocrinology, and my field was looking at the molecules in the brain that everybody now talks about: serotonin, opiates, oxytocin, dopamine. These are molecules of emotion, and they regulate and fine-tune your immune system. If you have a very aggressive immune system, you're likely to get things like autoimmune illness, allergies, etc. If you have an under-responsive immune system, you're more likely to get infections and maybe even cancer. So I saw the connection between emotions, mind, consciousness, brain, endocrine function, immune function. That took me from what we call mechanistic medicine to lifestyle medicine, integrated medicine, and today trying to understand what is existence. So that's my journey.
So when you think about today, we will talk about the topic that's on a lot of people's minds is about the coronavirus and what is it really? What is it? What does it mean? What's your perspective on it? I know you've talked about we have a lot of bacteria in us as humans. So like, what's your perspective on what's going on right now in the world?
So first of all, we should all understand that viruses and bacteria as genetic information have existed long before humans appeared on the planet. So humans as Homo sapiens, um, we appeared on this planet about 200,000 years ago. And we have a common ancestor with primates, but two different lines of evolution. So Homo sapiens, the human biological organism that we see today, like you and me, and everyone else, has existed only for 200,000 years. Viruses, bacteria, etc., fungi have existed for millions of years. Even the coronavirus, which is a flu virus, has existed for millions of years. The reason we call this particular virus COVID-19 is it's the latest mutation that occurred in 2019. So mutation is a genetic mistake, a genetic error, a genetic you can say a lack of proper spelling. So your DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid, is the alphabet of life. And there are 4 alphabets. They stand for complex names: A, T, C, G, adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine. But these alphabets spell out what we call genes. Genes are those stretches of DNA that cause the production of proteins. And that's how life starts, with the production of a protein from DNA and genes. Now, it seems obvious to scientists that we share these genes with all of existence. So 70% of your genes are the same as a banana. 80% of your genes are the same as a monkey. No, sorry, as a mouse. 99% almost are the same as a chimpanzee or a gorilla. So we share genetic information with the entire ecosystem of existence. Genetic information in the form of DNA or RNA, ribonucleic acid, is what a virus is. It's just a little bit of genetic information, and actually it's part of the communication network of the entangled genetic information that gives rise to the ecosystem that we call life. So viruses are very essential for the existence of life, and also they are bacteriophages. They go into bacteria to reproduce themselves because bacteria serve as the host. Viruses need a host, a DNA, to replicate themselves, and they're part of existence. When that existence, and what I'm telling you is really, maybe regarded as controversial by some of the mechanistic evolutionary biologists, irrespective of that, it's very clear that mutations occur when there's toxicity or stress or inflammation, all means the same thing, in an ecosystem. And in this case, this ecosystem is the entanglement of genetic information. So right now, climate change, for example, is destroying the ecosystem. It's the most important factor of our existence right now, is that the entanglement of the ecosystem of life is being destroyed. And so mutations occur, and this is a mutation. And as soon as mutations occur, then there's a reset. Now we are back in our cages, we call them our homes. The ecosystem is repairing itself. The sky is clearer, the seas are bluer, the stars are shining at night, birds are singing in the morning, even people with asthma in Bangalore are breathing better. You can see the Himalayas from hundreds of miles away. Fish are returning to dead lakes. You can see fish even in the in the canals of Venice. Bees are returning. Bees are responsible for 80% of nutrition in this world. And they were disappearing, and now they're coming back. So there's a reset. And COVID-19 is the opportunity for us to actually see the opportunity here for reversal of climate change. I never thought climate change was reversible, but now I think it is. I never thought the oil-free economy was possible, but it seems it's possible. When the oil price drops to less than zero, something is happening. So I think we are seeing a reset in the entire ecosystem of society, including financial markets, how we do business, how do we do trade, how we do communication through technology. In the last 100 years, every time there's been a pandemic or a crisis or a financial crisis, there's been the emergence of new technologies. So AM radio came after World War I. TV came after World War II, even though other things came, atomic bombs and crazy stuff. But then you had the internet in the 1990s after financial crises. You had the mobile phone in 2000, then you had the smartphones. Now you have artificial intelligence and VR and augmented reality and deep learning systems and this technology, and soon cryptocurrencies and shifts in financial markets and the way people do trade. If we are listening to the lessons right now of COVID-19, a little bit of protein that has shattered literally all human structures, then we can come out in the direction of a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world.
But why do you, so there's a perspective, do you think it's nature? So it could be just this thing we were hurting it sounds like we're hurting the environment and then something triggers to then correct. Do you believe
yes,
there's a hand of God in there? I'm just, you talk about God and science. You're always between God's, science, spiritual, like there's this, you go around those topics a lot. Is there a greater hand in it, or do you think it's just what it is? It's this evolutionary thing that has happened, or?
Rob, we can make any explanation we want. Scientists have their own explanations. Religion has its own explanation. Mythology has its own explanation. Economists have their own explanation. Biologists have their own explanation. Mathematics and Bayesian mathematics has its own explanation. I think the most important thing to understand is existence or life is not just human existence or human life. Existence is all life, and existence or life is unstoppable. It's self-regulating, it's invincible, it cannot be stopped in its evolution, and it's not just human existence. Existence is all of life. So life and existence are self-regulating, self-organizing, self-evolving, and no species has a privileged position. So humans share the same DNA as all of life. We share almost the same genes as all of life. And in fact, our existence is entangled with all of existence. So that's the only lesson I can take here, is that don't interfere with existence, don't interfere with life, because your life is dependent on all life.
But then do you consider, like, people are dying from this, obviously. So there's the knock-on effect. People get sick, they're dying. We had an employee, a young employee who we lost at the beginning of this thing about 8 weeks ago. He was 23 years old. And so there's a part to it that the change that happens is there's a part that's horrible, or
yes, suffering is inevitable when there's a reset. Okay, it's inevitable. But on a practical level, let's see why people are dying and how people are dying, because that's important to address. There are many pandemics going on right now. One is the transmission of the infection. The second pandemic, which is accompanying this infection, is what we call stress and panic. Stress is the perception of threat, whether it's physical threat or financial threat or economic financial threat or psychological threat or emotional threat. But stress is exactly that, the perception of threat. And when people are perceiving threat, irrespective of the situation, certain things happen in their body, which is, one of them is referred to as sympathetic overdrive. Your sympathetic nervous system which is actually a protective nervous system responsible for the fight or flight response, it goes into panic mode. And when it goes into panic mode, there is inflammation and compromising of your immune system, which makes it more likely for you to suffer from morbidity and mortality and also to get the infection. So you're more susceptible when you're stressed, in any case. Now, we also know from other scientific studies that 95% of chronic illness, which is things like diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, chronic illness, cancer, autoimmune illness, frequent infections, 95% of all of that is actually not to a genetic mutation, even though it's linked to genetic mutations. It's linked to lifestyle and it's linked to stress. So once you have this sympathetic overdrive, then you're more likely to get chronic illness. And most people who have chronic illness, 95% of them, have low-grade inflammation, low-grade anxiety, and low-grade depression. They accompany every chronic disease, 95%. Only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant, which means they guarantee the disease. The rest are connected to lifestyle. So if you sleep well, if you meditate, if you practice some kind of mind-body coordination, if you exercise every day, if you have healthy emotions like compassion, love, empathy, joy, equanimity, and peace of mind, if you have a reasonably good diet which is healthy for your microbiome and not inflaming this genetic information, which is 95% or more is bacterial in your body. If you give good nutrition to your microbiome, which means maximum diversity of plant-based foods, food that is not coming from a factory or contains inflammatory products like antibiotics or whatever, fertilizers and insecticides, which are inflammatory products, then you can mitigate or minimize the damage. Now, recently, we have also been doing studies at our foundation looking at why are young people getting sick and why are young people dying, and some of them are getting obscure things like, loss of taste or smell, or, they're feeling confused, they have inflammation in their skin, they have cardiac arrhythmias. And what we are discovering through modeling is that most of these people have what are called acute inflammatory storms. Inflammation that goes totally out of control, and that makes them sick, and frequently they end up on a respirator, including young people who have acute inflammation on top of chronic inflammation. What are the causes of acute inflammation? Well, mostly stress, but also lack of other things, lack of sleep, lack of exercise, lack of mind-body coordination, improper breathing, nutrition, disrupted personal relationships, marital problems, job anxiety, on and on. The factors are innumerable, and no modeling. Right now we are depending on models, mathematical models, to see who's getting sick, who's not getting sick, and what is happening. No modeling can actually input all the hidden variables of COVID-19, including population densities, weather patterns, humidity, transportation. And now it's becoming clear that even air currents and particulate matter can carry the virus. So if you are, say, 20 yards away from a person who's smoking a cigarette, you can smell it because you're inhaling particulate matter from their lungs into your lungs. So we're connected through particulate matter. In fact, the COVID virus and other viruses can be carried through what are called wind currents, the jet stream. So you don't need to be in an airplane to transmit the virus from New York to Britain or Europe. Can be carried through the jet stream. It's uncontrollable, the spread of the virus. Of course, we can take precautions, masks, distancing, social distancing, washing hands, everything that we're being told we should do. But if we don't manage our stress and our anxieties, we're going to make it worse.
So do you think when you think about everyone wants this to end and we get back, people think about getting back to some normal, where do you think it plays out? How does it play out in your mind? If you
Okay,
say, do we all
a lot
have
of
to like
people.
not be stressful for it to like where does it go? You know?
So, Rob, what I'm saying, not everybody may or may agree with it, but I'm very pretty sure of my conclusions, having observed how life operates over
Yeah.
50 years. I'm pretty certain about my conclusions. So my conclusions are based on good demographic, epidemiological data, science, public health. My conclusion is that this particular mutation, COVID-19, is here to stay. It will become part of our ecosystem. However, it may not become more virulent. It will probably become less virulent. And it becomes part of our ecosystem. So every year, like every people, some people get flu, some people get cancer, some people get heart disease, some people will get COVID-19. But if we are careful when we go back, we have a little more respect for, just climate, ecosystem. If we become a global society that focuses on how to reverse climate change, a more socially just economy, and conflict resolution, war, terrorism, mechanized death. These are the scourges of modern society based on total egocentric, selfish behavior. So if we can just reverse that, instead of saying what's good, what's in it for me, just ask ourselves what's good for all of us, for all humans. But then what's good for the ecosystem that makes human life possible? What's good for existence? What's good for life? We start with that, and then we move in the direction of a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world through conscious choices. Just asking this one question, what's good for everyone, we can start to make a journey towards reset and restoring homeostasis. Homeostasis is the biological term for self-regulation, which is an aspect of nature.
So when you think about, by the way, everyone, if you want to, is about 430 people on here now. Feel free to put something in the chat window, and if you have a question for Deepak, and I'll pick a couple as we go down the line. To continue on about the peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier world, and I know you use that language very particular most of the time about what your vision is of what could happen if certain things are done. When you think about where we are today, and now there's all the protests happening, not only in this country, but around the world, around injustices that have been here for many years. They didn't just happen with the death of one man at the hands of a bad cop. There's just these injustices that have been here for a long time. What is your, the virus sort of kicks stuff off, and then now we have this, and my feeling is that we actually will see a lot of this. There's going to be more and more focus on the injustices of the world. And so what's your perspective on what's happening with the protests and Black Lives Matter, and it's a global phenomenon. There's a connection to people on Earth about this. What's your take on what's happening and how we're going to move forward? And is this the beginning of some bigger changes, not just for one group, but for many groups? And, what's your perspective on all that?
So my perspective is that this is a moment of choice. We can go back afterwards to our old ways of behaving, living, thinking, speaking, and relating to the world or to existence, or actually we can resurrect all of existence. And the choice is now. As we are operating right now with the mechanized death in the world, and cyber warfare, and ideological conflict. All conflict is ideological, whether it's religious or social, it's all ideological. Racial injustice. If we go in that direction, then we're certainly headed in the direction of extinction. On the other hand, we can actually change that through conscious choices. Now, while I see the Black Lives Matter and the and the protests and even the violence as a natural reaction to racial and social injustice, and while I see these movements that are cropping up as catalysts for change, real change will not come unless we get to know ourselves better. So, the other day I was looking at this whole history of racism, and this is what I found, which is, I hope everybody else here is familiar with as well to some extent. I'm just reading from scientific literature right now, my own research. Early humans first migrated out of Africa into Asia about 2 million years ago. They migrated to Europe about 1 million years ago. And what we know for sure now is that beneath the surface of our skin, we are all Africans. You're an African, I'm an African, everybody is an African. And here I'm giving you another quote from Dr. Spencer Wells, who's an expert, geographic project land expert. And he says, you and I, in fact, everyone all over the world, we're literally African under the skin, brothers and sisters separated by a mere 2,000 generations. Old-fashioned concepts of race are not only socially divisive, but scientifically wrong. 99.9% of human genes are identical and do not fit into physical categories. So, I was thinking, it's how interesting that the world has been, in a way, culturally appropriated by colonialists. And we have to be honest about this, okay? The colonialists of Europe, so-called white people, are also Africans originally. But they lived in temperate climates, cold climates, hard climates, and the primary modus of survival was conquest. And on the other hand, people who were indigenous cultures, originally Africa, but Asia and everywhere else, they were more connected to nature. They saw bright colors, they were connected with nature, they were more prone to understand, in my opinion, beauty and intuition and nurturing and affection and your favorite word, tenderness. And, this is complete different mindset epigenetically. So the conquerors came, they subjugated the colored people of the world into servitude, into slavery. And that became part of our epigenetic information, so as a colored person, even I, brought up post-colonial India after the British had left. But in my mind, I had this attitude, the British are smarter than Indians. My grandfather, my father got inducted into the Royal College of Physicians. So there was already a problem with self-esteem. On the other hand, the colonialists had another problem. They thought they were superior to everyone else. And so we have this situation right now, which is a fact of history. It's a fact of our evolution. And we can't deny it. Slavery, servitude, exploitation, murder, conquest, rape, pillage, this is our inheritance. Whether we are victims of it or whether we are perpetrators of it, it's our history. And we can't deny it. And right now, of course, a lot of people are resentful, justifiably so, but that's not the solution. Look at the history, the past, look at the present, what it has done, and then look at the future, what can be changed. And what can be changed is to a deeper understanding of epigenetics and how it modulates and influences our thinking, our behavior, our self-esteem, our ideas about social justice, economic justice. If you want to look at who's getting sick in the United States right now, acute and chronic, all you need is a zip code. Zip code tells you everything about a person's life expectancy, their economic status, their education, their attitudes towards racism, on and on and on. So just that one thing, tells you the circumstances of your existence. Everything from education to history to health benefits. So if we want to really move beyond just being upset and angry, which is justifiable, we have to actually look at the past, the story of the past, the story of the present, and the story that we want to create in the future together. It's everyone, because in the end, we are all the same genetic pool. The rest is geographical. The color of your skin is geographical, period. Even Africa, we say Africa. Africa is as diverse as Europe. To say that somebody Nigerian is the same as somebody Somali or South African, or, from Botswana, is not understanding race or understanding how this happened.
So what can we do? I think there's two parts to this. One is, what can we do, or what do you think we can do as habits to change, you said we have this history and we're all part of this history, whether you're a victim or a perpetrator, you said. So we play in this. So what do we do as a habit, or what do we do to change our future? And what would you recommend? And then, so that's one part. Someone also wrote, during this time of great unrest and upheaval, how do you maintain your sympathetic and parasympathetic balance during this time? So what can we do to have the balance, have the homeostasis, and then how do we move forward with our thinking about these big topics like race and discrimination?
So, Bob, I think the first thing is to start getting a little uncomfortable. As the first step, uncomfortable with your habitual opinions and habitual patterns of behavior and your habitual certainties. I have a problem with that too. I mean, I'm habituated to think in certain modes of thinking because of the influences in my life. We all are conditioned minds. So the first thing we need to do is engage on a little reflection, which is my daily practice. By the way, I start my day with asking a few questions. Who am I? Who am I? It's a very difficult question to answer. You have a changing body, so you couldn't be your body. You have a changing mind, you couldn't be your mind. You have changing emotions, you couldn't be your emotions. Who are you? What are you? And if you really examine this question very carefully, you'll see that you are awareness. You're a conscious being. And your primary experience of existence is sensations, period. Your primary experience of existence is sensation. You're always seeking sensations that make you feel a little pleasurable and avoiding sensations that make you feel anxious or separate or depressed. This is our life. We create a story around sensations, always moving in the direction of sensations that could be pleasant for us, irrespective of what they are for other people. So first thing is, who am I? Second thing is, what do I really want? Will making more money definitely make me happy, or maybe slightly happy, or maybe more miserable? It depends on you. There are people whose entire identity depends on the stock market. And there are other people whose entire identity depends on whether they can get a meal or not. So what do we want? Number two. Number three, what's our common purpose? And number four, what are we grateful for? You just start with that. I start with that by day, and then I also introduce 4 intentions in my consciousness: joyful, energetic body, loving, compassionate heart, reflective, alert mind, and lightness of being. So 4 questions, 4 intentions. I let my day be guided by those 4 questions and those 4 intentions. Now, of course, because we all have time these days, I hope a little more. Some people are busier than ever. I still keep to an 8-hour day every day, doing what I'm doing right now or other things. But I have now the time to engage in reflection, time to watch my breath, the time to do some yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or some exercise even in the house, or take a walk with my wife on around the cove here in La Jolla. So this is a time to reflect on most fundamental questions. What do we want collectively, and how do we get there? What's the new story? It requires patience. It's not, overnight that there's a magic bullet right now. There's patience, there's timing, and the timing, by the way, is now. If we don't do it now, we'll never do it.
So to take it to also another part of that, we're social beings. It's a question from somebody, we're social beings. And maybe some of this protest is also when we're all locked in our homes, a lot of people are unemployed, they can come together now and focus on important issues because there is a little bit more time. But I think we all worry about the fact that because we're social beings, we're not able to socialize right now. And then when we think of our cities, like right now, we're thinking about like, what are we doing with all of our offices? We have like 17 offices around the world, mostly in cities. What do we do with these offices? How are we going to work? We're working from home now. Things are working quite well. There's a lot of challenges. If you have kids at home or you're single and you're in a small apartment with someone else and you're sharing that apartment. So we know there's some challenges, but what's going to happen with our being social beings and not being social in cities? And cities are about social behaviors and getting together, being on top of each other. What do you think happens with all that?
So Rob, as humans and primates and mammals, we are all social beings. Every mammal is a social being. The word mammal comes from the word mama, which means mother. It's also the origin of the word matrix, the entanglement of existence. So all mammals, but human beings in particular, bond emotionally through physical means: touching, cuddling, cooing, kissing, licking, smelling. That's what a mother does with a baby. That's how the baby gets bonded to the mother. The baby doesn't understand language. It looks at its mother's eyes, her facial expressions, the tone of her voice, her gestures, her body language. But what it is looking for is an emotional connection, which basically boils down to four things: attention, being heard; affection, being cared for; appreciation, being noticed; and acceptance, not trying to change another person. This is the basis of all emotional bonding, and physical contact is a very important part of it. So social distancing, as we are now practicing, is unnatural. It's necessary, but it's unnatural. Okay? And ultimately, it can lead to disease. Social distancing will lead to disease ultimately. But right now, it's a necessary process for us to mitigate the spread of the virus, hoping that it will mutate to a less aggressive virus if the ecosystem is not stressed. So I personally think that this is a temporary measure. You cannot stop people or humans or primates or mammals from engaging socially. It's the basis of their existence. You cannot stop it. So it is going to come back, and it's going to come back in a little more saner way. Will not, bacteria, viruses, fungi, human genes are all entangled in the process of existence. So they are part of our existence, and we will live with them, and we will adjust to the reset, and we will actually be a little more saner. So, until 2 years ago, it was good not to wash your hands. Okay, it was good to eat with your hands so you could put these microbes back into activity. It was good to shake hands. It was good to kiss, etc. Because that's how human life operates. Okay, now we've gone to the other extreme. Okay, we're so scared now that nobody can touch another person. For now, it's fine, but it's not a solution, obviously. So how do we come back to a reset which is not totally at one extreme or the other extreme? And it'll happen. This is the way life evolves. We don't have to worry about this. Life is invincible. Life takes care of itself. Life regulates itself, and life evolves. All we have to do is stop interfering.
Hmm. So when you think about life, and let's go to another topic. It's a hot topic for you, obviously, is consciousness. And what are we? Where are we? Are we here? Are we somewhere else? Are we painting this as a picture to be here today? Is this really about physical matter? We're physically here. So the idea of what is consciousness, and then we think of AI. You and I have talked about before AI and the replication of the brain, and then consciousness. And there's an interplay between those concepts and what our beliefs are about how AI will be moving forward. But I'm curious, what is that, and what do you believe we are as humans? What are we really? And
Well, you've asked a question that people have been struggling with for the last at least 2,000 years. Okay, since Plato, Socrates, Aristotle in the West, but all the philosophers of the East have struggled with this idea, and it's referred to as the mind-body problem or the consciousness-matter problem. Considered a problem by scientists because we do not know the basis of any experience other than all experience. The only fact of experience is sensation, whether that's a visual sensation or an auditory sensation or an olfactory sensation or a tactile sensation or a taste sensation or a thought sensation or a feeling sensation or an emotion sensation. The primary fact of existence is sensation. What is the mechanics of that? That's the big problem. So, Plato in the West was the first idealist. He said there's no such thing as matter, it's only mind. His student, Aristotle, was a materialist. He said, no, but there's no such thing as mind, there's only matter, mind is a byproduct of matter. And so this argument has existed east-west forever. Then we had dualism, which cropped up during, say, the time of Newton and all these other great thinkers. And we know Descartes as the dualist in the West. I think, therefore I am. So Descartes was a very interesting person. He said, the religious people can take care of the mind and the spirit, and the scientists can take care of the world of matter, and everybody will be peaceful. Galileo can do his stuff, and the Pope can do his stuff. And so it was a very good reconciliation, except if mind and matter are two different things, then how does one influence the other? So if I lift my arm, that starts with a thought, which is not material. This is very physical. So how does mind interact with matter? What's the medium? And if you really examine this, then you realize that dualism doesn't work because what is the medium of exchange? It violates all the laws of thermodynamics. If mind and matter are two separate things, then that's not scientifically valid. So now that leaves only two possibilities, and maybe a third. One is matter is the only reality and mind is a byproduct, which is called the hard problem of consciousness. How do atoms and molecules produce thought? Nobody knows. Okay, and they say, we'll figure it out. But then who's the we that's going to figure it out? Atoms and molecules? As atoms and molecules are going to figure it out, what causes mind? So that's called the hard problem. Furthermore, nobody has actually experienced a substance called matter. You don't experience matter, you experience perceptions. And then your interpretation is that's matter. And then when you start to look at this thing called matter, atoms, molecules, force fields, particles, you realize that before these particles are observed, they actually exist as waves of possibility. And if you ask scientists where, they say Hilbert space. And they'll say, what is Hilbert space? They say it's mathematical. You won't understand it. So now, we have a problem. We can't explain how matter explains any experience. The third thing is it's only consciousness, and matter is an interpretation of perceptual activity, which is consciousness interpreting its own perceptions. Now that's the view I support, that there's only consciousness, and consciousness is the creation of sensations, everything else is a story. Whether it's a theological story or a religious story or a mythical story or a scientific story, doesn't matter. They are stories, human stories. In order to really know true reality, you have to abandon all stories, transcend all stories, go into stillness, which is basically what the spiritual traditions also say: be still and know that I am God, or ideas like that. They've existed. You know, when Moses goes to the burning bush, says, God, what's your name? God says, I am that I am. Okay, Jesus, before Abraham was, I am. So Abraham is an experience. I am is the source of all experience. And I am is not you, me. It's the Holy Ghost, if you want to use that expression. But you don't have to call it that. You can just call it awareness, modulating itself as experience, and humans creating a story. No giraffe knows that it's called a giraffe. Okay, no insect knows it's called an insect. What does the world look like to an insect with 100 eyes? There's no such thing as reality. Reality is the story you create around sensations. And so, sensations are products of consciousness.
And you have this belief. I remember we were in the we were in the Sistine Chapel during our project alone in the morning, and you were saying, and it was a beautiful experience. I remember we were there, as nobody was in there, and you were saying if I could draw the blood of someone who came in and then draw the blood when they leave, their DNA would change. Like their mind over their body, over even their physicality, is quite powerful. I remember you talking about this, and you did a whole research with Harvard on this.
So Rob, what changes is not the DNA. What changes is the activity of your genes. The DNA is just alphabet.
Right, activity, okay? Gene activity, right.
Yeah, the activity of your genes changes with every experience. Right now, everyone who's listening to us, their frontal cortex, this part of their brain, is very active. In order for this part of the brain to be active, you need the firing of neurons. In order to fire the neurons in a certain way, you need a certain genetic activity over here and not in a different part of the body. So every experience is modulating genetic activity faster, or at least as fast as the speed of light. Why do I say that? Because all interactions in our body are fundamentally electrochemical, electromagnetic interactions. They're interactions of photons. So our genes are changing their expression at the speed of light with every experience. Now, right now, we are having, hopefully, an intellectual experience, so we are activating genes here. But if we were having an emotional experience, we would activate genes in another part of our brain, which is the limbic brain, which is the emotional brain. If we were scared, we would activate the genes in our midbrain so we could run or fight or kill, etc. So every experience is modulating genes, and that doesn't matter whether it's a perception or a thought or a feeling or an emotion or an image. It doesn't matter. Experience is all we have to know our existence, and the way we interpret that experience actually modulates the gene activity which constructs our body. In the deeper reality, there's no such thing as a body. It's just an intermittent stream of sensations which is interpreted as a body.
But ultimately, so somebody had an interesting question, like, is there one thing you would recommend that you do in your life that makes you successful, or some change you made, or is there a thought that could help us with that regulation? So that, yes, because ultimately you're saying this can create disease or not, or cure disease within us. So
yes, along with everything else, you have to understand that everything is multifactorial. Disease is not just one pathogen causing disease. It's a pathogen is part of the whole ecosystem. And so when the host is susceptible, then disease happens in the presence of a pathogen or a carcinogen or whatever. So, it's not that simple. It's complex. But what can you do personally?
What's the one thing you would say, like, if you could do this every day, wake up, I would recommend?
Yeah, so I redefine success as the progressive realization of worthy goals, number one. Progressive realization of worthy goals, number one. Number two, which means the goals are not only about me, but about existence. Okay, progressive realization of worthy goals. How to make people happier and healthier. That's my modus operandi.
Yeah.
Number one, progressive realization of worthy goals. Number two, the ability to love and have compassion, because without that, life is meaningless. And number three, to get in touch with the creative center in your own self, which is not your mind. It is the stillness between your thoughts. And that's the value of meditation. So the formula for me is redefine success in those three terms. And then everything happens automatically because you're guided by those three intentions.
Great. That's a redefine success. Gotcha.
Yes.
So we're coming to almost the top of the hour. So I had a question about death. So when you think about consciousness and our physical being and what death is in all of this, the ecosystem of our lives, or whatever you want to call it, what is death then to you?
So just look at this rationally and without any religious bias or theological bias or scientific bias. Look at this issue directly through your own experience. And what is my experience? My experience, and yours should be, if you examine this experience, that everything that we call experience is a sensation. Whether it's a sound sensation, a visual sensation, a taste sensation, an image sensation, a thought sensation, whatever, everything is a sensation. So consciousness is the source of all sensations. Without consciousness, you wouldn't know that you have a sensation, right? So to be aware of sensation is to be conscious. And what is aware of that sensation is what we call consciousness or awareness. You can't have any experience, including this one, in the absence of consciousness. Now, if we understand that all experience is the arising and subsiding of sensations, because all sensations are intermittent, then death happens at the speed of light and birth happens at the speed of light. Every sensation, every thought, every image appears and disappears. In fact, by the time you hear my words, they're dead. By the time you look at me, the what you looked at is gone. You're only experiencing the past through the filter of memory. That's all that's happening. You're experiencing the past and then you're constructing the future based on that memory. Okay, based on that memory. So actually you never have access to your true self, which is the source of all knowing and sensation. Now, when you say, what is that? We are using a word, awareness or consciousness. So we say, where is that consciousness? Well, you can't see it. You can't find it. You know, if I say you have a soul, Rob has a soul, let me go inside his body and look for it. Can't find it. Okay. He has a mind. Let me go inside his brain, look for it. All I find is atoms and molecules. So I can't find this thing that we call consciousness. And the reason you can't find it is it's invisible. And the reason it's invisible is it's not material. It doesn't have any borders. And because it doesn't have any borders, it doesn't have a form. And because it doesn't have a form, it's infinite. It's timeless. It is eternal. What is in time is a sensation. And what creates continuity, the movie that we call life, is the presence of your own being in the middle of the sensations, in the absence of the sensations, and also within the sensations. So consciousness is present without the sensation, in the sensation, and beyond the sensation. It's infinite, it's immortal, it's timeless, it's you. You never die, only experience is born and dies at the speed of light. There's no birth, there's no death, there's no physical body, there's no universe, there's only you, and you are the divine being with a selective memory. That's all you are. There's only God, period.
Fantastic. So with that, I want to thank you, Deepak, for your. It's awesome. Every time I talk with you, and I'm glad we got to share it with close to 400 people at the company. You know, it's just, it always opens our minds, at least opens my mind to the possibilities and thinking differently. And I just really appreciate all the energy you give to the world. I know every time I talk, you're on a plane somewhere trying to, help people, and you really have dedicated your life to helping people better their lives and have happier lives. And I think we all hope that we get a more peaceful and just and sustainable and happier world through all of this. So we really appreciate your time, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everyone. Great pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. Bye.